Alright, let's explore some more of these tools. We've seen most of the brushes here so far, including some of the oily brushes, like a large cover to start an image. If you want to do a painting, perhaps give it a basic tone. And then there's of course all sorts of effects brushes like modeling clay or smearing, and we can do all sorts of funky stuff with that. Well, we can also get funky with some of the other tools, and let's start exploring some of them. I'm going to try to cover the linear tool and also the rectangle and oval tool in this particular video here. So let's start with something like a regular brush, maybe actually the simple brush, right? That. Let's give it a different color so we can see what's going on. I got pressure enabled. Let's start without it. Let's disable pressure on my tablet and start drawing. Alright, so now I'm going to draw with the linear tool. This linear tool does just draw one line, stretch line though, but so I can move this around, and you see the rubber band line in the middle, and when I let go, bingo, that line is done. If I choose a different color, it's there. Alright, it still uses the current brush settings. So if, for instance, if I switch to another brush like the airbrush that has a little bit of a softer edge, right, and perhaps also I reduce the opacity, right, so when I go to this, it will use these settings, right? So you can see that it's got a little bit of soft edge, and I can also change the step distance, and now it's got definitely some dots showing there along that line. Let's go back to higher opacity. There you go. So you see it's still looking at what the brush says, because it's essentially using the brush to draw that line, to go along that rubber band line that you see here, and it does that on the fly. So you can use that to create some interesting designs, simply one line at a time. And there you go. Now let's say we want to go a little bit further and also do random position and some other smearing effects. All of those brush settings here that we have already explored to some extent, we can use them too. So we can use, for instance, the random position right here. And so even though you're drawing a line from this lower left corner to the upper right corner, you'll see that it's randomly going off that track, right? So that's intentionally done with the random position. Maybe a little bit less of that. There you go. One more down here. Maybe also a random size. So you see some of the dots are a bit bigger, some of them smaller. And it's also possible, I believe, to use the pressure. Maybe not. But there is a lot of other modes and results you can explore here. You can give it some random hue, so the dots are not gonna all be the same color. Alright, let's go back to also random saturation, bleed, all these parameters that you usually have on a single brush stroke. You can also see them in some of the other tools when the tool actually uses the brush metrics, the brush parameters, to get its effect. So when you draw a single line along from one point to the other, you'll see the results there. Alright, so what other tools can we talk about in that context? Well, there is the rectangle tool, and that of course will use the same idea, where you draw a rectangle and the brush metrics, all the parameters of your brush, will be used accordingly. So if you have random hue only a little bit and you give it a reddish color, then it's mostly a reddish set of dots going along there. And you can reduce the random size, you can reduce the random position if you want to go perfectly along that path. You can increase or rather decrease the step distance back down to very small, and then that way you get a perfect line going in there, and reduce the hue so you have the exact color, the more traditional rectangle. So that's again a tool that will use whatever current parameters you have on your brush settings. And that could include something like a smear brush. Right? So for instance, if you use the effects modeling clay, let's see what that does. Okay, normally that will kind of smear it like this. Well, if you now use the rectangle tool, you can see that it's going to smear along that path. Maybe an easier way to see that is if you start with a solid color something like what's the primer? Well, let's erase to green and then actually switch to a different color and see if that will do. Nope, that's not easy to see there. Let's go erase to black, and that's not much better. Let's go use a different mode then. Let's go and erase to white and set the brush to let's see some other smear modes here. Totally oil, something like blue. Yeah, well, see, it's all depending upon some existing images here. Let's start with a pattern, perhaps. Let's give it something like render a checkerboard. There. All right. So I'm going back to my rectangle tool, and now you see that rectangle smearing along wherever you set that rectangle. Right. So the brushes are smearing along that path, and you can use a Shift A to do that again. So it's replaying that same tool again and again every time that you hit Shift A, as we've seen in the other video, another tutorial on Shift A. So let's use perhaps now another brush. Where's my general, effects brush? There it is. Let's go with a large smear effect. Get the focus on my toolkit here and Shift A. And of course it thinks it's in the brush, so I have to make sure I undo that and go to the rectangle tool. Shift A now. There you go. And what's going to happen is that you can see it's sort of a combination of tools here. You have a variety of things come together. You got the brush parameters, but you have the rectangle tool. And so it's using all of these different combinations of different tools to create a resulting effect from that. And you can see that throughout a couple of tools. You can see that, for instance, also with the oval tool. Okay, so for instance here, when you go with the oval tool and you draw something like this, you'll see it basically smear along that oval outline, that round outline. I'm going to undo this a couple of times here and do just one here. So from the upper left, it's actually centered on it, so I'm going to undo that and go from the center. There you go. All right. Now, one thing to be aware of is that both of these, the rectangle tool and the oval tool, they're actually double tools. They're a double icon, and you can see it split in the middle diagonal here. So if you hit the upper left part, the upper left side of that icon, you get the hollow version. And if you use the lower right half of it, if you click on the lower right, it will use the filled version. Let me show you that. I'm going to switch perhaps to yet another mode. Let's use something like pencil charcoal there. Right, so that would be a brush like that. If I use the rectangle in the upper left corner of that rectangle tool, I get a charcoal going along it. If I use the lower right, it's going to fill it. And it's going to fill it with the current fill settings. Now in this case I have this color as the primary, so it's probably going to use that. Yep, there it is. And it's going to use other parameters that are in the fill settings. You can also see, for instance, if there is paper enabled, there may be paper texture. There may be also a gradient mode instead of just a fill mode. So you can have a gradient enabled, right? You can have papers enabled. Let's go and reduce that. We'll turn it off altogether. So you have a gradient fill capability here, and you could also have it filled in a circular way. You could have it warp fill. You could have it warp fill around both corners. All sorts of different ways to use this. And same with the oval. So the oval also has a upper left half that gives you the oval along that path. And if you choose different colors, you'll see it draw along that, right? Whereas if you use the lower right portion of that same icon, it will be a fill mode. It will be a fill version of the oval tool. So the oval and the rectangle tools both have a two-sided, two faces to it, if you want. The upper left half and the lower right half. And so let's do the oval one more time. There you go. And we don't call it circle because it really is an oval. You can make it look almost like a circle if you want, or ideally like a circle, but you can also squeeze it down one way or the other way and make it an oval. And the idea is, you can basically create very quickly some rather sophisticated shapes with that. Combine that perhaps with the mirror. Let's go back to the main brush tool here and enable mirror mode for vertical, and why not also horizontal mirror. So everything you're drawing needs to be drawn in the upper right corner. Right, left doesn't happen, bottom doesn't happen. It's the upper right quadrant when you have both the horizontal and the vertical mirror enabled. But you can now certainly focus on that and do all sorts of funky stuff with that. And let's see if you could perhaps even pick one of those up as a custom brush. I'm going to quickly switch to the main, there you go, to the swap buffer, and then pick that up as a custom brush. Maybe one way to do that is to use the oval alpha selection tool. I probably could have used the another way, which is the magic wand, but I'm going to now pick that up as a custom brush, pick the selected as a brush, right, and store it so I can verify that, yep, it got that. It has a little bit of a white edge here. I probably didn't do a very good aiming at that, but that's okay for this quick demo. And so all I'm going to do now is to paint with that. So my paintbrush, I need to make sure that I switch to the settings. That's my custom brush, and it already did that. The moment I picked that brush up, it became my current brush, so I can paint with it now, right? And maybe I wanted it to turn and rotate as I'm drawing, so I want to allow custom brush transform, and that will make it smaller with the tablet pressure, bigger if I press it a little bit harder. So you can do quickly something that looks like it's farther away because you press lightly. It's kind of a perspective effect, and then you press a little bit harder, it gets bigger, and then you press very hard and it's a very big one, right? So, and then if you want one that's like right in front here, you can have it like that. No, that's not what I wanted. Let's go something like this. There you go.